So, there is the weakness of distance based methods, which is that you take this set of species you want to build a phylogeny, you take their corresponding sequences, let us say sequences of the same gene that is present in all of them, and then you do an alignment, and then you look at what is the distance between all pairs of rows in this alignment, all pairs of species in this alignment, you get a distance matrix, then you get a tree that is connecting all of these different species together, and your sequence information is lost. Now, I want to attach these sequences back to the tree and also want to learn what are the common ancestors, these internal nodes, what sequences they may be. Okay. That is what we want to understand further. Okay. So, what have we seen so far? We have a distance based phylogeny algorithms, multiple of them we have seen so far. All of these algorithms are in terms of these recursive algorithms, you either pick a limb or a cherry and then you reduce the size of the matrix by one row and one column and then you recurse it. In the end though, you will only get a tree and you will have basically if you have chimp and right, if you have these I, J, K and L, which are these current day species, you will get a tree like this, but you will not know what are the common ancestors of K and L, what is the common ancestor of I and J, those kind of internal nodes you have no clue about, right. These ones you have the current day species, so you have some sequences that are associated with them, this may be some AACC, this may be some AACT and so on, right. You have some sequences associated with them, but the internal nodes are common ancestors which are some time in past, we cannot travel back in time. So, we do not know whatever these sequences are, right, that could have evolved to this current day species I and J or current day species K and L, right, but can we computationally predict what may have been the internal states here. So, what is this node sequence, what is this node sequence. So, you have a sequence associated with this, what is this sequence of these two internal nodes, right. That is what we want to look at, and this is called the small parsimony problem. If you have a tree topology and if you have all the sequences containing these different characters, this each of the location and the sequence is called a character. If you have the sequences of characters, then can you estimate what is there in the internal nodes. Okay. So, we have in this particular case chimp, human, seal and whale, and then you have these n species, 4 species, they have m characters, there are 10 I believe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So, you have 10 characters, each character is a column, right, and this particular 10th character is T in chimp, T in human, C in seal and T in whale. Okay. The question is, if you have someone has given you a tree topology, what are the internal sequences for these common ancestors that would have evolved to these sequences. Okay. So, like for any computational problem, I mean we can put any sequence here, right, we need to put a sequence that will optimize some objective function, right. So, what is that objective function? That we need to first define and then we can go ahead and present an algorithm for the problem. Better to put an A, let us say I want to, the objective function is I want to minimize the number of edits from this ancestor sequence to each of the child sequence, and similarly from this sequence to each of these child sequence, and similarly from this ancestor sequence to each of its children. Okay. I want to minimize the number of edits or changes as you go down from the root of the tree all the way down to the species I mean the current day leaves of the tree. Okay. Along each of these edges, if you just count the number of edits or changes that are being made, I want to minimize the total sum of changes. Okay. If that is the case, then in the chimp and human, if you look at this A and A, the first letter is A in both. So, then this question mark can be A, then I will not be doing any change at all, right. The second character is going to be C and a T. So, then I can either put here a C or a T, but that will depend on what is on the other side. So, here the other side you have a C and a C. So, the second letter is going to be a C, right. So, then it is better to put a C here rather than a T, right. Let me just write this thing down. So, this is an A. This is an A here. So, then this will be an A is better to put. This is a C here and this is a T here. So, I can either put a C here or a T here for a cost of 1, but then on the other side you have a C and a C. So, this is going to be a C, right, and so it is better to put this to be a C and then this to be a C. So, that there is one change of this C to T that is occurring here. So, if you only consider the second letter, right. So, then this will be the only place where the C changes to a T, everywhere else the second letter will be C. Okay. So, to figure out what each of these question marks are, I have to look both at the two children here and also what is happening in the rest of the tree, right. Then only I will be able to figure out the best solution. Okay. So, but we will try to formulate this problem before we look at a dynamic programming solution for this problem. Okay. So, the parsimony score is going to be the sum of the Hamming distances along each edge. Okay. So, if you go from here to here, it is not only C and T are changing, right. So, it is not only that the C and T are changing, but there is also this C and A that is being changed, right. Everything else is fine. So, I have a Hamming distance of 2 between these two strings. From here you have 1 changing, here we have already seen that A to T changes. There is also a few other things which are changing. So, the C is changing to an A. So, that is another 2. So, the total cost of this tree is going to be 1 plus 1 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2, right, which is going to be 6 plus 2 8, right. So, that is the parsimony score, sum of Hamming distances along each edge. Parsimony score is going to be 8. So, the small parsimony problem is going to be find the most parsimonious labeling of the internal nodes of a rooted tree. Okay. And the most parsimonious meaning that you want to minimize this parsimony score or the cost, if you will, right. So, rooted binary tree with each leaf labeled by a string of length m, right, a labeling of all other nodes of the tree by strings of length m that minimizes the tree's parsimony score. That is the exact computational problem. Is there a way we can simplify this problem statement, right. So, here we looked at all the characters here, but every character is independently being set, right. So, the first character we set by looking only at the first character of all of these current day species. The second character we only looked at the second character. So, we do not have to look at all the characters together, you can just iterate over every character one at a time. Okay. So, you can just say that a rooted binary tree is given with each leaf labeled by a single symbol, a labeling of all other nodes of the tree by single symbols that minimizes the tree's parsimony score. So, you only have to look at one character at a time, because the addition of all of that, if you minimize for each character, then the addition of all of that will also be minimized. Okay. So, instead of all of these characters, we just look at one of these characters, which is this fourth character that is shown here, A, T, 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 A, right. And then we similarly we can iterate over every one of these characters, m characters. Okay. Here is a dynamic programming algorithm, right. So, let T v denote the subtree of T whose root is V. Okay. Then at this particular location V, right, you can put one of the 4 letters A, C, G or T. We do not know which is the right letter. Based on looking at its children or descendants, it may suggest some particular letter, and that I mean the cost of this tree rooted at V, right, can be determined when you fix this V, and then it will break down the problem into these 2 separate problems. One is the subtree rooted at V, and then the other is the rest of the problem. Okay. So, V can be tried with all possibilities A, C, G and T, then the dynamic programming algorithm can be used. Okay. So, we are going to say let T v denote the subtree of T whose root is V, define Sk of V as the minimum parsimony score of T v over all labelings of T v, assuming that V is labeled by K. Okay. So, which means essentially that V is going to be either labeled as A, C, G or T if you have DNA sequence, right. And so, this K is going to be one of A, C, G or T, right. So, you are going to for each K in A, C, G and T, we are going to set V to be A, C, G or T, and then we are going to say that if V is A, what is the best parsimony score you can get for this tree rooted at V. If V is C, then what will be the best? If V is G, what will be the best? That is given as Sk of V. Okay. Sk of V is the best score you can obtain, right, for T v over this T v is basically this whole root, right. So, this whole tree is going to be called T v, okay, the tree rooted at V. So, what is the best tree that you have when V is set to A? What is the best score you can obtain when V is set to C, and so on? That will give you Sk of V. Okay. Once you have this, then and once you also have, let us say this is W. So, then this will be T w. You will also have calculated it by having this as A, C, G or T. Then you have only 4 cross 4 16 possibilities, right. So, you have broken down the overall problem into the optimal subproblem for T w, optimal subproblem for T v, And then once you have these two things for all possibilities of W being ACGNT and V being ACGNT, to get the optimal problem for all the nodes that is rooted at this root node, then you have to only consider 4 cross 4 equal to 16 possibilities, right, and take the best among those 16 possibilities, right. So, that is the dynamic programming optimal problem substructure. For considering all the nodes at the root, you just look at the left and the right. The left is W, right is V, right, and then you compute the optimum among the left for all possibilities that W is A, C, G or T labeling, and all possibilities on the right for all labelings A, C, G and T, and then you look at all these 16 possibilities, and your optimum solution is going to be one of those 16 possibilities, and you label your root in a way that that gives you the best among these 16. Okay. Let us look at it, and the final score is going to be this root, right, and it is going to be equal to the minimum value of sk of root over all symbols k. Okay. So, let us say that you want to recurse this problem and you want to find what is the optimum here. Okay. So, then you have to look at this as the left node W, this as the right node V, right. So, this is your new root in some sense, right, and then here you have to set W to be labeled to be A, C, G or T, V labeled to be A, C, G or T, and then look at this T V and look at this as T W and find the optimum of T W, optimum of T V, and you will be able to get it, right. So, and we are going to do it from the bottom up, so that you do not have to repeat certain computations again and again. Okay. So, let us just define these deltas. So, delta I j is 0 if symbol I is equal to j and delta I j is 1 otherwise, right, and you will essentially get the recurrence out of these 16 possibilities that I talked about. This all symbols I is 4 in case of DNA, this all symbols I is also 4 in case of DNA, one is the left and the other is the right. Okay. So, you look at Sk of V is going to be the best of, if this V is A and then you want to set your root here, right. So, to be A, then there is no change here, the cost is 0, but if this is C and this is A, then the cost is 1. So, that is why you have this delta I j is going to be 1 here and 0 here, right. So, delta A is 0, delta C A is 1. Okay. That is why you have this delta I k here and delta j k here. So, this is how the dynamic programming runs. So, initially you have the C here and all of them are other than C is assigned to infinity and C itself is assigned to 0. So, then you have over here you have your what you will set up here, right. So, you look at all possibilities, you will not take any of these infinities, you will only take the option C and C, and so only if you set it to be C, the delta will be 0 both here, right. If you set it to G, for instance, the delta is going to be delta G C is going to be 1, delta G C is going to be 1, and you will get 2 as your cost of this optimum subtree, optimum parsimony tree rooted at this particular node G. Okay. So, you will get 2022 here, you will get 1122 because you have A and a C here, and so you can either put a or a C for a cost of 1. If you put a G or a T here, you will get a cost of 2 because delta I j will be 1 along both of these if this is G, for instance. So, then that is not a good idea. You put a C, then this will be 0 and this will be 1, and you will get a cost of 1. Okay. You can put any of A and C. Similarly, you just compute it here and here. So, you go bottom up, then you go into the next layer and you go to the final layer, and you can backtrack to fill in the remaining nodes of the tree. Okay. So, backtracking is required to see that okay, finally here I chose this to be C, right. So, then I need to choose a C here and a C here, right. So, that is what this is, and then similarly you will have to say that this C of 2 is obtained by taking this G of 0. So, then this G has to be put in. So, the backtracking pointers will solve the small parsimony problem. So, you can apply the small parsimony to this tree to reconstruct the ancestral coronavirus sequences, right. So, especially if you have some human sample and a palm civet sequence, then you can know what is this internal, what is the likely internal sequence from which this human and palm civet has evolved. Okay. Okay. So, let us look at the summary of what we have seen so far. The small parsimony for unrooted trees, right. So, for rooted trees we have seen so far. For unrooted trees, we want to find the most parsimonious labeling of the internal nodes of an unrooted tree, an unrooted binary tree with each leaf labeled by a string of length m, and the position of the root and a labeling of all the other nodes of the tree, that is the output that you require, okay, by strings of length m that minimizes the tree's parsimony score. So, the way to answer this is your root can be in any of the edges in the current tree. So, you can try every edge that way, and then you can run the previous rooted tree and you can take the best among all of that, right. So, that will solve this problem. So, we will not get into it in detail, but that is if there are 4 I mean if there are like some x number of edges, then you just try to put a root in every one of these x edges in your tree, right, where the topology is given to you, and then that node in that edge is going to be the root, and then you now have converted this unrooted into multiple rooted tree problems. Then you run your algorithm that we just showed here, right, this particular algorithm, DP algorithm every time, and you take the best among all of those. Okay. So, let us look at a final thing, which is the large parsimony problem. The small parsimony problem is called in a way as small because it is an easier problem. We are given the tree topology and then we are asked to find the ancestral states, and the tree topology we assume is returned by the neighbor joining algorithm or the UPGMA algorithm or the additive phylogeny algorithm, okay, some such phylogeny construction algorithm, okay, that has given you the topology or the structure of the tree, and we only need to infer the internal states. Okay. How about the large parsimony problem? That is the problem where we do not know the tree topology also, and we have seen earlier that if you do not know the tree topology, figuring out the best topology and the best internal states will make the problem much harder, and that is why it is called the large parsimony. Okay. Like we said before, the parsimony score here is 8. These are the current day species and we have inferred these internal nodes. Okay. The parsimony score is 8, but then if you have not chimp and human together, right, but let us say chimp and seal are together, okay, between this where chimp and human are together and here chimp and seal are together, then if we run the small parsimony algorithm on this tree topology, then your parsimony score actually becomes 11, right. So, it was initially 8 and it increases to 11. Okay. We can also look at chimp and whale being together and then the parsimony score will become 14, right. And these are the different ways in which you can all the possible topologies among 4 species, right. And so, you can see that among all of them parsimony score of 8 supported by chimp and human together and seal and whale together is the best among all of these topologies. Because it is a small number of species, we have only 4 species, the number of tree topologies is not too large here, but if you express it as a general n, right, if n is the number of species, then you are going to have more than exponential number of trees that are possible, right, tree topologies that are possible. And so, as the number of species grows larger, it becomes a harder problem to try out every topology and run the small parsimony problem, right, it becomes an NP-hard problem. That is what is formally said here. Given a set of strings, find a tree with leaves labeled by all these strings having minimum parsimony score, right. Input is a collection of strings of equal length and the output is a rooted binary tree that minimizes the parsimony score among all possible rooted binary trees. Okay. The tree topology is not given, that is the main difference between the large parsimony problem and the small parsimony problem. You want both the best topology and you want the leaves labeled by these strings, right. So, that is the key here. Like these kind of complicated set of problems where you do not know the tree topology, you want to find the best topology, meaning that you want to find one among all the tree topologies that will give you the best parsimony score. Okay. That problem is NP complete, but you can use certain heuristics where you do certain local operations, right. So, you can do a greedy heuristic where you start with some arbitrary tree topology and then you run your small parsimony algorithm on that to get your parsimony score. Okay. Then you can take some internal edge A B for instance, and then this internal edge may have a structure like this where you have 4 subtrees that are connected to this internal edge A B, right. You can then produce you can then do some swappings, right. You can take W and put it in Z and then take Z and put and connect it to currently this W is connected to A, this W subtree is connected to this A node and this Z subtree is connected to B node, right. You can just swap it so that the Z subtree is connected to A and W subtree is connected to B, right. So, then that will give you a different tree topology, right, and then for that you can rerun your small parsimony problem and see if you have improved your parsimony score, and you can try to walk around in this space using these greedy moves, right. and the way I think about it is the following. You have this, let me see if I get, yes, so these are all possible moves, right. You have the space of all trees, space of all tree topologies. This is of exponential size, this is not polynomial in size. So, we cannot go through all of the trees, but you can start from some location which will be, let us say, this particular tree, this may be called T, and then from there you can make a jump to something called T prime, where you consider an internal edge a comma b that you choose at random, let us say, and then you have now switched here x and y. So, x and y has been switched and it has now become y and x, right. And then between this and this, so this is T prime, I call this as T prime, right. And then this one you have basically w and x are both connected to A. Now, w and z are connected to A, right. So, essentially here you have swapped z and x, z and x are being swapped, here y and x are being swapped. So, you can have many such moves, and so you have T double prime. So, you can choose one of these moves at random, you can choose one of these edges a comma b at random, then you can choose one of these moves at random. So, maybe you jump from T to T prime and then from T to T double prime, and then in each spot you can calculate what is your small parsimony score is, because you have the topology T, you can run the small parsimony algorithm and you can get the parsimony score. For T prime you get the parsimony score, for T double prime you get the parsimony score, and you keep on moving if you get better and better parsimony scores, right. If you do not get a better parsimony score, maybe then choose one of these T prime and T double prime that gives you a better parsimony score. So, that is a greedy heuristic way of running around, and then you will not be able to sample all the trees in this huge space, but you will be able to sample greedily some amount of trees, and so you will be able to find among those sample trees what is the best tree topology and in terms of the smallest parsimony score. Okay. So, that is again a code challenge. So, you have in this space what is all the T prime, T double prime, etc. of an input tree T, right. So, given a tree, given an edge in a binary tree, generate the two neighbors of this tree, right, an internal edge in a binary tree, the two nearest neighbors of this tree for the given internal edge, and then this can be used as a way to implement one of the steps of the greedy heuristic. So, the overall algorithm goes as follows. You set the current tree equal to some arbitrary binary rooted tree structure, that is your whole space of trees, you just start with T, right. Then you go through all the internal edges and perform all the possible nearest neighbor interchanges, right. So, from T you get T prime, T double prime and so on. You solve the small parsimony problem on each of those. If any tree has parsimony score improving over optimal tree, set it equal to the current tree, otherwise return the current tree. Okay. So, they are proposing the following. So, you start with some T, you look at all the other trees that are possible by just nearest neighbor exchanges T prime, T double prime, T triple prime, T 4 primes and so on, right. For each one of them you calculate your parsimony score including the original tree T, and then whatever is the smallest, let us say T 3 prime is the smallest, that will become the current T. So, you just set your T to be T triple prime, right, or in other words T is going to be argmin of all T j which is coming from the nearest neighbor exchange of this T, right, parsimony score of T j, right. Whichever T j is this T prime, T double prime and so on, whichever T j gives you the best parsimony score, then that T j is going to be set to be the T, and then your iteration keeps continuing in this greedy manner. Okay. So, this is another challenge for you to implement this nearest neighbor interchange heuristic. Okay. So, evolutionary tree reconstruction in the modern era. So, how can we construct using large sequences, right, very large sequences, and I mean so far for toy problems we have been looking at very small 10 characters at a time, like sequences of length 10 and so on, right. But it does not have to be the case. I mean now we have next generation sequencing technologies which are giving out all the sequences of different genes and even the whole genomes, right. So, how can we exploit that information? and this was even recognized early on in 1963, right. So, people are working with morphological characters, anatomical characters, wings, legs and so on, right. And then when people started looking at molecular sequences, they were able to then capitalize on that, and these are some of the examples, like there was hemoglobin structures evolution, evolution of the hemoglobin protein that really benefited from looking at the molecular sequences and using that to construct phylogenies, right. And it has been used to solve other problems, such as what is the pedigree of panda, right. So, this giant panda over here, right, is it closely related to the red panda or to the bear family, right, because it looks like a bear in one sense and then a panda in the other, right. So, this is one of the most popular animals in zoos, right. So, these giant pandas, we have kung fu panda movies based on these pandas, right. So, are they closer to red panda or raccoons, or are they closer to the other bears, right. So, this seems to be one of the debate that could be resolved based on molecular sequences derived from these pandas. And going on from animals to humans, even tracing human origins, right. So, these molecular sequences and phylogeny constructed out of molecular sequences have really benefited the field. This is a particular gene sequence that has been taken from different people from different current day populations in Africa, and then the non-Africans, right. You have Chinese here, Korean here, English here, French and so on, right. And we have Japanese, Australian and so on, and these are the different populations or ethnicities in Africa. Okay. You can see here that now if you construct the phylogeny by taking the sequences of a particular gene across all of these individuals and constructing a multiple sequence alignment, getting a distance based phylogeny, right, you get this particular picture, right, where all the African sequences are grouped together and all the others are grouped away, right. Now, the question is, did human population originate from Africa, did they evolve outside of Africa, or is it the other way around, right. So, that human populations originated in multiple places in different parts of the world and then including in Africa, right. So, the theory that supports this out of Africa hypothesis, right, that this tree actually supports the out of Africa hypothesis, that human beings originated in Africa and then from there they migrated to other parts of the world, and that can be understood in the following. So, I want you to look at this tree and then see why this tree supports the out of Africa hypothesis. Okay. So, this is the out of Africa hypothesis of human migration and evolution. Why is this tree supporting the out of Africa hypothesis, right? You can see here that the common ancestors of these African populations are this is drawn in an ultrametric fashion, right. So, these are the ages, right. The common ancestors of these African populations are much older than the common ancestors of the other populations, right. So, this is much older than the common ancestors of, let us say, these European or other, the non-African populations, right. So, which means that these African populations have had longer evolutionary times to diverge, right. So, from the point in which their common ancestors, they have had a longer evolutionary times to diverge, and then all of these other populations are more recent populations, they have only had a small amount of time to diverge. Okay. So, we have this this common ancestor here is at a much older age than these other common ancestors. So, these populations have had much smaller times to diverge, right. So, the divergence in terms of the sequence differences between the sequences from non-African populations are much smaller, and so their common ancestors are also more recent, and here you have much more diversity, and so their common ancestors is placed at a older age than the other populations. Okay. This suggests this African populations have had more time, more more number of years to diverge. Okay. In fact, this is the number of years, 200,000 years ago you have them started and then they are diverging into different paths, and in India you can see that this is 70,000 years before, and these are the different Homo sapiens, and initially there were also other species of humans, right. So, the current day species is Homo sapiens, there is also Homo neanderthalensis and Homo erectus, right. These are other common ancestors from which the kind of the apes and humans have diverged, right. And you can see here that based on the sequences you can even predict a way in which human beings have migrated out of Africa. There are also other controversies that has been resolved through phylogeny. So, phylogeny has been incredibly useful in coming up with predictions of how sequences and species have evolved, and to answer important questions such as tracing human origins. So, where did we all come from, right. We may all look very different, but in fact we all came from common ancestors who all originated from Africa, for instance. And evolutionary trees have also been used to fight crime. So, we are not going to go into it in detail. So, evolutionary trees have been I mean this whole set of algorithms we have looked at, it has been a little bit detailed in terms of the techniques we have used, right, and the kind of diversity of these 3 different algorithms we have looked at, and then the small parsimony and large parsimony problems. So, there were like several computational algorithms that are at play here. But the reason that there is such a diversity of these algorithms is some of these problems are NP hard, and some of these problems are solvable in polynomial time, but there are many approaches to solving it in a robust fashion if your input matrix is not additive, for instance, right. All of these are important, all of these approaches and diverse algorithms are important because of the diversity of the applications of evolutionary trees, right. So, from understanding the human origins to understanding the evolution of the hemoglobin, right. So, the beta hemoglobin structures, to understanding questions like whether giant panda is related to the brown bear or red panda, and all the way down to crime. Okay. Some of these applications we did not look at in detail because of the diversity of these applications. It is important that you have multiple phylogeny algorithms and multiple assumptions that these algorithms satisfy, and we need to verify these assumptions in the real world data before we can make a robust conclusion. Okay. I hope you enjoyed this session.